But like I say, I like this project because there's not a lot of control. It's just sort of you let things happen, but you can control it a bit by the colors, by colors. So I like using text and type a lot. So I have a few old art magazines, and I found that those work really well because there's a lot of color. So with this piece, I'm just thinking about color. So let me switch to let me share the screen here so I can show you what. And I made another PowerPoint. I'm the master of PowerPoints. I love making them, and I think it's important to look at art a lot because I think that's it's as important to look at art as far as learning goes as it is making the art. So I'm constantly looking at art all the time, and you know when I do that, I'm sort of stealing. You know, a lot of people say, "What do you mean stealing?" But you know, I look at how people use things and how people use color. You know, how people use this or that, and I just take it and use it. And I'm not really copying somebody, but in a way I am. I'm just taking things that I like that sort of fit my aesthetic and sort of use that. So I'm constantly looking at stuff. So I had a professor one time that said artists are like vessels. They just keep collecting things and then they eventually pour things back out. So I like that idea that you're constantly looking for things or storing things visually, and then when you make art, you're sort of pouring that back out. So let me make sure I'm at Zoom. You guys can see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, good. I can never tell. Or see my computer screen. So here's the discussions. And here's today's project number 3, DeCollage. I'll skip the first part because I have a PowerPoint about this top part. But in this project, you'll be creating 2 to 4 works using the decollage technique. The size of the substrate that we're using is 6 inches by 7 inches, or 7 by 6, depending on what orientation you're using. Usually, when you're describing artwork, the size of artwork, you always describe the height first and then the width. So just a bit of information. I find it a lot easier using a larger substrate, and it sort of matches the cover a bit, or the magazine pages that you're using. Glossy images work well. This is a really good technique for collaging or decollaging as you're using the sheets from the magazines. So also I use Mod Podge. I find that works the best for this project. Glue sticks aren't going to work because it'll have a tendency just to pull the entire image off instead of ripping or tearing the image. And you can see, think about colorful images. Those have a tendency to work well. You can use flat colors, patterns, things of that nature. I like using text a lot. One thing about this project, you're not controlling things, but you can to a certain degree if you have an image of a person or whatever. You can sort of glue around that and then pull things off. So, but you do have a little bit of control. But to start, you're gonna start out with 2 to 4 sheets of watercolor paper, 7 by 6. A lot of people use a foam brush for applying glue. It's a little smoother as opposed to a bristle brush. I always use a bristle brush, scissors, and of course discarded magazines and Mod Podge. I put a couple videos on here as well that you can watch. I'm not going to show them now, but one is a Danish artist. I'm not sure how you pronounce his name, Auger Jorn. And this is, I think, from the 60s. He's making a decollage. So you might be able to get some ideas of how he's working. And also there's another video that I found that's sort of a time-lapse video. And instead of showing at the beginning to the end, it shows the end first. And then you can see the beginning. So it's kind of a fun video to watch. And again, you can post your project on this page just by clicking reply. What I'm going to do now is I'll show you a PowerPoint that I made on DeCollage. I didn't put any of the artist's name on that, but just kind of look at the imagery to see how they're using that. This is a pretty popular technique in collage, and it's about taking away. It's a subtractive method of working. Whereas when you're collaging, it's an additive method. So you're adding things onto the substrate. What people get wrong with this is they start tearing images and then gluing it down. Kind of looks like a decollage, but it's not really a decollage. You want to take things away instead of adding things. You do add things, but you also take things away. But I think what some people do with this project, they just want to tear and rip the pages and then glue them down. But that really wouldn't be considered a decollage. A decollage in art is just the opposite of collage. Instead of, with collage, you're building things up by gluing things down. And you're creating it by cutting, tearing away, and otherwise removing pieces from the original image. So that's really decollage. The word is a French word. It means to take off or to become unglued. So it's the opposite of glued, sort of decollaging things, or to become unstuck. Examples of decollage. I'm not sure how to pronounce that word, but it means taking away imagery. And you could actually look that word up, and there's a lot of artists that you can look at that's doing. It's basically decollage, really, or a cut-up technique. A similar technique with the decollage is the lacerated posters, and I think that's maybe where this really came from the 50s, where people would post posters in the street, and they would just glue a poster over top of another poster, and eventually they would get torn off. So you would start to see underlying images from the previous poster. So some of these get really thick and they get really built up. And it just creates a really nice, rich vocabulary imagery. And I found a few here. Now, these are just decollages. I think some of these elements are glued on, it looks like, instead of being taken away so much. Another method, and I'll post his work, he builds up work with ephemera and starts sanding them away with a sander, so you can start seeing things underneath. The decollage, you could use sandpaper if you wanted, and it would be the same, sort of the same. You get the same thing. But here's another one. It starts to look like an abstract expressionist painting in a way, very gestural. There's a bit of motion involved in that. But here's another image where the artist sort of didn't glue anything in the center, and then glued things and tore things off around the edge. So if you wanted, and that's a little bit controlling to work this way. So that would be one way. If you wanted to highlight an image, figure, or whatever, you would just avoid gluing things on top of that. And here's another piece. And you can use a lot of different types of paper. It's not just for magazines. So I knew of one collage artist that would do these decollages, and what he would do, he knew where these places that had billboards, really large billboards, and he would frequent them, or he found out when they were putting up new posters. So they would tear that off and they would just discard it. He would just take those pieces that they tore off So, you know, I was talking the other day about scale and how the things that you found dictated the size of your collage. Well, these pieces were really big. They were, in some cases, like 6 feet by 4 feet and larger. So he was using a lot bigger materials. So, but his studio was filled with just those really big pieces of billboard papers that he tore off. But you can see that it does, you do have a little bit of control as far as composition. And you're controlling color too, a balance of color. Like with this one, you can see the colors are balanced here. And you're aware of where the yellows are. Here's another one. This one's very textural. And really, wrinkling, it doesn't really matter. That adds part of it. But some of these take quite some time to develop. And I'll show you in the demo where I just created one layer. Some of these may be 10 layers thick. So really elaborate one. This is just really a lot of tiny pieces. So I think this is a fairly large piece as well. So it looks like it is because these elements are all small. Another one here, this are just using different types of paper. But these pieces sort of have a history to them in a way. They're sort of like time capsules because you can see layers and layers and layers of. This one's really nice. I think it does. The artist did a great job using color with this and parts of text. It's like when we looked at this Russian constructivism, where they started using text, but it was text as a design element as opposed to something that had a message. This one's pretty elaborate. Again, it's probably fairly large piece. And then I think that was the one we first saw at the beginning. So I'm going to switch out of share. Anyone have questions on any of the images that we looked at? I posted these images in files as well. So if you want to go look at them, you can. So
I have a question.
Sure.
Although you might be covering it in your demo. I'm wondering, from reading the description and from watching the videos, are we supposed to glue all of our layers down and then start removing, or are we supposed to glue a couple and then
you can do it different ways? I've seen some people glue a lot of them, but you want to make sure that you can see how I went over the edge here. I want something that I can pull on. The technique I'm showing is you're gonna put layers down, tear things off, put more things down, tear things off. You could do this a number of times. There's an artist, I can't think of his name, and I will post it, where some of his pieces are 3/4 of an inch thick or more.
Mark Bradford?
That's who it is. I can never think of his name, Mark Bradford. And there's a ton of videos online too where you can see him doing that. So he's sort of gluing things down. He's not too concerned with, you know, what he's gluing down, but when he starts unearthing it, it's sort of like he's excavating the surface, and you start to see these past things. And I think that's why I think of something as being sort of like an archaeologist and that. So, but what we're going to do, you guys are going to use 6 by 7. I think that's a pretty good size to work with this project. Anything a little smaller gets a little harder to handle. So what I've done first, and what you want to do first, you want to glue one thing entirely to cover everything. You don't want to see the white of the substrate too much. So what I did here, and you can't see it, you can see peaks of it, but I found a sheet of paper that was orange, and I glued that over the entire surface. So that was my starting point. And I just went through the magazine and looked for things. And then I have these little handles, and you can see on the back side. That lets me peel things off. There's only like a couple layers here. So what I want to do is, and then I let this dry for quite some time. I put this on about an hour ago. So it's really dry. You can also work with different times too. So it can be partially dry and you peel it off. So you'll get different effects for different amounts of time that you're using. But what I'm going to do first is start with a top layer and just start tearing it off. Now, some of them won't stick, but I can put my finger on it and that'll keep part of it glued on. Instead, if the paper is really glossy, the entire sheet may come off. So I sort of hold part of it. And I could, let's say I'm kind of happy with that. Now that's the first stage, and I would probably trim this off. And you'll notice it did take some of the the entire sheet off. So holding your finger in certain places is probably a good idea to do. Now I cut up some other pieces here, and I'm just going to start gluing other things down. And it's about building up the surface. And of course, you could still use some of these torn pieces. You could glue those down again. But what you want to try to avoid is just gluing things down that's torn, because that's really kind of an additive process instead of a subtractive process. So I've got my glue here, and I just want to keep gluing. It's a good idea maybe to work on a few of these at a time. You could also, since this paper is really glossy, I could also take sandpaper and sand it up a bit. If I do that, it's going to open the fibers of the paper a bit more, so it's not going to pull the entire sheet up. So I could start gluing again. And I do have a little bit of control here, in this case, where I'm putting things. And you can be fairly generous with the glue, so it's not really, it's not something that you have to be really precise with, and very clean and neat. But I am using my roller again. Always use my roller. But you're really kind of composing it as well when you're adding things on top. I may want to use a little bit of the red here, but by all means use the sandpaper. I don't know that I have any sandpaper close by. I would sand the back of it. You could also sand the top of it as well. That will take some of the paper away. So I'm adding and then I'm taking away. And I might do this 2 or 3 times, or maybe 4 or 5. It just depends on how far you want to take it. But each time I add stuff and tear it away, I can look at it and see if I'm happy with where it's at. If it isn't, you can see the orange there underneath, which I didn't use a lot of glue, so I could just add more glue. So this technique's more like a very action-oriented sort of technique where I'm very physical. But I would just keep adding things, and you could cover up most everything. I like to kind of look and see how it's working, because I like this orange here, and I like how it's balanced at the bottom here. I like the red, so I might take something that's red to balance that out. I noticed Henri Matisse, French painter, he always would balance colors out. So if you saw a blue color at the top right-hand corner, you would see a touch of blue at the bottom left-hand corner. So he's really good at making you move your eyes around the composition. You could think about color theory. Another thing Matisse did a lot is he used complementary colors. So a complement of orange would be blue. So when you use those two colors together, they become very attractive. That's why they're called a complement, because each color complements the other. The same thing holds true with red and green. So you can start to control the image a bit by color. But see, I can start to tear this off, and you can see a bit of the background that was underneath here. So you start to get some really exciting things happening with that. And it's the process of going back and forth until you finally get where you want. But let's say I'm kind of happy with this. I probably want to glue this down a bit more. And I always use a wet paper towel. That's really handy for wiping off excess ink. So let's just say I'm happy with that. What you can do is make sure that it's super flat. I like coating my work with either a matte medium. It's sort of like a sealer. But I also could coat this entire collage with Mod Podge. It would kind of seal everything in. I knew one collage artist, she used gallons and gallons of Mod Podge, but she would like really lather that Mod Podge on so thick that you couldn't even see the image. And it was like white, but when it dried, it was sort of like a piece of glass over top of the image. So I like using that, especially on these magazine cutouts. So this might look a bit hazy now, but when it dries, it would give a nice surface quality to that. So that's kind of, now you could keep going and going and going and going, and just keep adding stuff, taking things away, adding things. But what you want to do is you want to kind of look at it as you go along and find out where the stopping point may be. I think with this, that's the most important thing, is knowing when to stop. So, but you know, regardless, you could just keep pushing it and pushing it. So there really is no ending until you just decide you're not going to glue anything else down. This was pretty quick, pretty simple. And I'm kind of happy with it. I like the colors that I chose. I thought that worked well. So any questions on this process?
I have a couple, Randall.
Sure.
My very first collage instructor, I brought my little kit along with me, papers, and I brought Mod Podge, and she screamed at me. I'm not kidding. Never use Mod Podge. So I haven't used it since then, and that was about 9 years ago. May I use matte medium instead of Mod Podge?
Well, give it a try. I haven't used it with the slick magazines. I think the matte medium might be too thin, and it might just lift off. This Mod Podge is a little thicker. Bookmaking glue works well, PVA. I ordered a gallon of PVA, and it's kind of expensive because it's archival, and it's a bit thicker than the Mod Podge. So you could give it a try and see how it works.
Okay.
I'm a firm believer in trying something because it's about experimentation.
Right.
Something may not work, and then it may work. But if it doesn't work, you kind of learn a great deal from just something not working.
Yes.
But any glue, any thicker PVA glue will work. There's one that I order from a book supply, and I can't remember the name of it, but it works pretty well. But it's real expensive. So Mod Podge is kind of inexpensive. I don't know if this is archival or not. I can't find anything. Was there a reason that your teachers did not use it?
That may have been the reason. I'm not quite sure. She was just very picky about being professional, and she said Mod Podge was for crafting. So the whole class never used Mod Podge.
Well, the thing about archivalness is these papers aren't archival. So
Right.
most of the things you're using aren't archival. What I do when I make collage is I buy PVA, or I'm sorry, it's UV spray, and it comes in a can that's like 12 inches high, but it's mainly used for digital photography. And the claim is, I don't know whether it's valid or not, but the claim is if you spray your digital photo with it, it will double the time. So what it does is it protects light from
Right.
and that's probably the worst enemy, or the number one enemy from artwork is light. So what I do when I'm making collage is I'll coat, when I finish the collage, I usually coat it with matte medium, because I like a matte surface, and then I spray it a couple times with the UV spray.
The UV spray. So my second question was, in your first demo, you had let the pieces dry, and then you tore them off. And then you put more pieces on and you tore them off while they were still a little wet. So we can use either method?
Yeah, just play around with it and see what works. I'm always I really learn a lot of things by things not working, or I kind of get the feel for how the material is working or how it's not working. So I think a key thing to learning is just try things and just make notes of things that work and things that don't work. I've discovered ways to work just by things not working or just something happening. So you kind of want to tune into things that work and doesn't work, and kind of use those moving forward. So there's really no hard set rules, but a lot of times I learn things just by trial and error.
Right.
And
Okay.
kind of exploring.
Thank you.
And that's the nice thing about collages too. It's so immediate. You know, you don't have a lot invested. If something doesn't work, you sort of just move on to something else because the material's somewhat disposable in a way. So I think that's one thing I like about collage, is that reason, as opposed to me doing a painting where I have so much time invested, everything has to work right. So I hope that answers your question.
That does. Thank you so much.
Anyone else have a question about this project?
Nope.
Some people like it, some people don't like it so much. I'm a huge fan of it because there's an element of surprise. It's almost like I'm not really making the work, it's sort of making itself. So, and then there's the idea of discovery along the way, where if something new is happening constantly. So I would look at this, maybe what I would do is I would maybe put this away for a day or so. Then I would take it out and I would look at it again. I may feel differently about it a couple days from now. So if that's the case, you can always continue on gluing other stuff. And I probably would glue other things on here to make it more all over, sort of an all over effect. But you could save all your pieces, scrap pieces as well, to re-glue and to tear off. But I would work on 5 or 6 at one time. You'll find, then that way you're constantly doing stuff. You know, when you're doing something, put this one away, work on another one, and another one, and then maybe bring this one back out and reevaluate where you're at with it. A lot of times too, I'll give you another tip. Since I put a lot of glue on this, when it dries, it's probably going to be curled up like this. What I like to do is use a spray bottle with water. You can mist the back of this with just a light mist of water. And then I would take a piece of paper. I would fold it so it's covering the collage completely. And then I would set something really heavy on top of it. And it's really cool because when you, the next day when it's dry, the collage is like super flat. So it has a nice feel to it because it is so flat and everything. So, but I did post some examples in files. I will post a couple videos on this discussion page with Mark Bradford. There's a lot of videos online of him working. So I'll try to find a video where he's using the sander and sanding things away. And I'll post that on there so you guys can look at it as well. Anybody have any more?
I do have one.
Sure.
I do have one last question. Do you recommend mostly glossy papers to collage down, or can you use flat images?
No, you can use flat images. You know, like I almost use some of this, which would be kind of nice. These are like scrapbook pages. Those would work well. What I don't like about the glossy images is they don't adhere as well. So you could do a combination of both. Just explore things, and like I said earlier, just take notes of things that work and things that don't work. A lot of times when I'm making art, I keep a notebook and I write things down in it. I don't really draw or sketch, but I write things. So it's helpful to take notes of things along the way. And then you can refer back to that because sometimes I forget things. You know, I may have an idea why I'm working that I may want to use later. So I just write it down and I refer back to that often. So, but yeah, just experiment around with different types of paper. I would be interested in seeing someone use maybe just printer paper, printed on a printer, and see how that works. It's got tooth in the paper, so it's going to hold, the glue's going to hold it, bond to the paper better, but also when you tear it off, you may get a nice effect, as opposed to using this. And you notice when I did that, some of the images just completely came off. And what I would do after knowing that, I would say, I'm just going to get some sandpaper and rough up the edges, and then see how that adheres or how that comes off. So, but yeah, just have fun with this project, because it is kind of a fun project where there's not a whole lot of design skill involved. It's sort of having a conversation with the piece. You do something, and then you respond to it. Then you do something again, and then respond back. So it's kind of a two-way conversation with the piece. I'm looking at it and see what I like and what I don't. Now, like when I casually laid that over there, I kind of like that. And you could just play around. You don't have to really make a commitment. You could just play around with placing these things on top and then deciding later if you wanted to glue them. But the nice surprise that I got here, it actually, if you can see, I'm not sure if you can see that, but you can see where it lifted off the text underneath. So instead of me gluing what I like on the top, I might glue what I like on the bottom. And that way, when I peel that off, maybe some of this would adhere like that. So it's all about experimentation and just playing with it. And, you know, you could do, I think, 2 to 4, probably a good number. So any more questions? I'm going to give you guys all kinds of techniques that you can use. Some you may not like, some you may like. So the whole idea is to grab on to something that you like really well and just sort of keep doing it over and over. Kind of make it your own that way.
Sounds good.
Hey, Stephen. Glad you can join us.
Hi, Stephen.
Well, that's all I have. As usual, I will upload this video. Sometimes it takes a little while for me to upload that because it has to download, then the file has to be converted, then I upload it, and then it takes a while. So, but as soon as it does, I will post it and send everyone well, it'll be on the same link that I sent earlier. So, well, good luck with this project. I'm looking forward to seeing this one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.